everyone. My name's Amy, and on behalf of the Academic Writing Education Center, I welcome you to Reading to Connect. In our Week 10 lesson, today we're going to be talking about a topic of defending human rights. Let's get started. So this week, we're inviting you to discuss the concept of human rights. So when we are talking about human rights, what are some of the perspectives that we're going to discuss today? And why are we talking about it? Number one, we're hoping to gain a deeper understanding towards the topic. Number two, when we're discussing this particular topic, we want to know how to pose the right questions. Number three, how can we discuss the different event and subtopic that surrounds this particular topic? And number four, how do we integrate all these different kind of information and be able to express our own opinion? Before we begin, I would like to show you this video about United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. At your voice. Spend a couple minutes, watch through it, and let's come back. So having read the clip, let's start with a bit of brainstorming and think whether or not you have thought about the questions. For example, what do you know about human rights? And who do you think have those rights? And why do you think human rights matter? So human rights are rights that we all have as human beings. They belong to all of us. Regardless of who we are, where we live, it is something that cannot be taken away. These are the things that we need in order to live fully and freely, and it protects every person's individual dignity. In general, human rights are separated into two categories, positive rights and negative rights. Positive right includes the right to health and to education, whereas negative rights are rights such as to be free from slavery or to be free from all sorts of discrimination. Now, there are many underlying values to human rights, such as equity, equality, respect, dignity, and justice. Human right is something that is embedded in our moral and ethic code. It's what people think is right and wrong and how it is reflected in the law of our current society. Essentially, human right can be expressed through the golden rule. Treat others as you would like to be treated. So then the big question is, why is human right important? Next, I'm going to show you a TED Talk clip basically talking about the vital role human rights plays in our daily life. Let's go. Now, after seeing the clip, why do you think it is important to have access to education, and how does that affect human rights? And how the concept of human right plays a vital role in our daily life? As well as does this clip answer the question, why is human right important? Why does it matter? Now, this clip basically explains that human rights is essential because it helps us to live a full and satisfying life. It's important for everyone to be treated fairly and equally. And human right recognizes the rights and dignity to each person. And essentially, it recognizes the importance of mutual respect between each individual person. So before we continue with our discussion today, we need to differentiate what are human wants, what are human needs, and what are human rights. Human wants are essentially what our desires are. It could be something that we like, but not necessarily need to have. Human needs are the things that are essential to our daily life and we cannot live without. For example, food, water, and air. But the word human right, according to the dictionary definition by Oxford Dictionary, is that the fact that a person or an animal can expect to be treated in a fair, morally acceptable, or legal way, or to have the things that are necessary for life. And so by differentiating these three different meanings, we're better at understanding what human rights actually are. So let's have a little bit of pop quiz. Can you tell me, based on the brainstorming activity we just had, are the following questions true or false? Question 1. Human rights are the set of moral and ethical rules states how we should treat each other. The answer is true. It did talk about that. Number 2, criminals should have their human rights taken away because they don't deserve them. This would be false, because regardless of their past history, human rights is equal among all of us, despite their criminal background. Number 3, immigrants require special measures to enable them access to more human rights than others because they suffer a long-term discrimination in our society. The answer would be no, because everyone's human rights is the same amount, regardless, again, because of the past history. Number 4, human rights are rights that are guaranteed to every human being in the world. This is correct because everyone should be and needs to be treated equally. Number 5, everyone has a right to speak freely without being responsible for the consequences. This will be incorrect because people would need to be responsible for the consequences of their action. Number 6, according to the United Nations, we all have the rights to go where we want in our own country and to travel as we wish. This is correct. We have the right to travel. Now, having done the warming up activity, let's get reading. We're going to be looking at the first reading of today, the story of Viola Desmond. And at the same time, we're going to go through our prediction skills again. So by looking at these few pictures, do you recognize this female named Viola Desmond? Her face actually appears on the $10 bills on Canadian dollars. Did you know what she has accomplished? How's the story related to our topic today? Is it about human rights? So before reading, you can assess your own knowledge of the topic and pose some questions. With that, it will help you to enter and be able to connect with the reading. So spend 5 minutes, go through the story of Viola Desmond, and then we're going to come back. Let's go. The story of Viola Desmond. Viola Desmond was an African-Canadian woman from Nova Scotia. She lived in a time when Black women were expected to be servants in the house and Black men were expected to be servants on train. From a young age, Viola dreamed of having her own business. By 1946, she was making her dreams come true. Viola was only 32, yet she had her own beauty salon. She had set up a school to train other Black women to work in the beauty business. She also had her own line of beauty products. One day, she was driving across Nova Scotia to make a delivery, but then her car broke down in New Glasgow. She has decided to go see a movie while she waited for her car to be fixed. She went to the Roseland Theatre. It was a brick building with a big sign that lit up at night. She paid for a ticket and went inside. The theater had a main floor and a balcony. Viola sat on the main floor because her eyesight was poor and she needed to be close to the screen. Just as the movie started to play, she felt a tap on her shoulder. A staff person told her she could not sit there. Her ticket was for the balcony. Viola went back to the ticket booth. She asked for a ticket for the main floor. The ticket seller said, "We don't sell tickets on the main floor to you people." That's when she realized that the balcony was for Black people. The main floor was for white people. Viola said that she could not see from the balcony. She put the extra money for a main floor ticket on the counter. The ticket seller would not take it, but she went back to her seat anyway. That's when the manager came. He told her to move to the balcony or he would call the police. Viola told him to go ahead. She wasn't moving. She was doing nothing wrong. Sure enough, the police came. They asked her one more time to move. Viola said no. So the police grabbed her by the arm and took her from the theater. They had to drag her. "I just sort of went limp," Viola said. "I wasn't going to make it easy for them." The police took Viola to prison. She sat up awake the whole night. The next day, she was taken to court. Nobody had told her she could call a lawyer, so she had to argue for herself. She didn't know how courtrooms worked, and she was found guilty. Her husband begged her to forget about what had happened and move on. But Viola bravely took the case back to court. Sadly, she lost once more. But Viola's case brought people together to fight for equal rights in Nova Scotia. They kept up the battle, and in 1954, the province finally got rid of the law that made it legal to treat Black people differently from white people. People of color are now equal under the laws of Canada. However, racism is alive in many Canadians' hearts and minds. Viola's story invited us to ask, What can we do to make sure that history does not repeat itself? So after you finish the reading, let's think, what is the topic of the reading? And check your understanding. So we can see 4 different options on the screen. Which one do you think is the main idea of the passage? Basically, it should be option C. This story tells how Viola Desmond stood up to the rights of Black people in Nova Scotia. It wouldn't be talking about the story of racial segregation in Canada, but it doesn't really discuss into that aspect. It wouldn't be talking about the story of history on movie theater in Nova Scotia either, because the concept of movie theater is only a part of the story. It wouldn't be option B either, although this story did explain why Viola Desmond was arrested and how she did violating a rule, but then this particular option said that she was wrong. That's more of a personal opinion, and hence option C will be the best to describe this story. Let's look at the second question. Based on the information of the reading, what can you infer from it? It should be option A, that Viola Desmond was a successful entrepreneur in Nova Scotia. Because again, when you're looking at other options, it just doesn't fit with the context. For example, option D, the law of segregation was enforced to separate Black and white Canadians in all commercial districts at the time. It doesn't really talk about that. We don't know what happened, what goes on in other provinces, what other districts. So other options are not as suitable as option A. Let's look at the third question. The reason that Viola Desmond had to defend herself in court was that, quite simple, it was option C, because nobody told her she could call a lawyer. It was clearly stated in the article. Number 4, based on the information in the conclusion, the author's purpose is to determine what? The answer should be B. It's to encourage people to prevent racism from happening again. It is written in a way to encourage our reader to take particular action. Again, other options, for example, option C is to persuade reader to become human rights, is not that evident. Now, having go through the different questions and read through the reading, we can now start to develop our critical thinking skills. How is this particular story related to the topic at hand that we're discussing today, human rights? The possible answer could be number 1, Viola Desmond was arrested for refusing to give up her seat in the white-only section at a movie theater. This is a fact. Now, through this particular fact, we can see and lead to our action of fighting for the right to free discrimination in court. At the end, we will be able to see that Black people at the time struggled to achieve racial equality. Through the different facts that are presented in this event, we can see how the content of our reading has integrated with our current knowledge. And through that, we are able to form a more critical attitude to think about what we've just read and be able to combine with what we just learned to achieve a more concrete understanding and more critical attitude towards the topic of human rights. Now, having finished the first reading, we're going to move on to the second one. Before you read, let's brainstorm a little bit again. Let's talk about healthcare system. We're very lucky to be in Taiwan. We have what we call universal healthcare, in which you do not have to worry about overly expensive healthcare while receiving the best care you can. But that's not the case around the world. In today's reading, we're going to be looking at the healthcare system in America. In America, it is very likely for you to go bankrupt once you get a hospital bill. And so, the question I'm posing to you are the following. Number 1, what does it mean for you to have healthcare as a Taiwanese or as a foreigner? And do you think that different measures are needed to prevent abuse on the use of our current health system? Number 3, should healthcare be universally accessed to all human beings? With these questions in mind, I want you to take a piece of paper, or again on your phone, type down your thoughts. What are your thoughts? And with that, we're coming back to the topic of human rights and how it's related to healthcare and the topic of the reading, which is human trafficking. What do you think the relationship and the connection between these different subtopics are? When you're ready, spend a couple minutes, read through the reading, and we'll come back and answer some questions based on your understanding. Let's go. Healthcare provider and human trafficking. It is estimated that there are approximately 21 million adults and children in situation of forced labor, bonded labor, and forced prostitution around the world as a result of human trafficking. Trafficking is frequently associated with repetitive physical and psychological violence, rape, confinement, and deprivation, which have been associated with a range of mental and physical health problems. The nature of these trafficking-related abuses make it likely that many, if not most survivors, will emerge with multiple health, social, and legal services needs. Yet, providing care for trafficked person can be complicated by, for example, ongoing threats from traffickers, insecure immigration status, or victims' participation in judicial processes. Care of trafficked persons often pose further challenges such as cultural and language barriers, unwanted pregnancy, and care for the children of trafficking survivors. Additionally, in many trafficking cases, survivors are also struggling with various social and economic challenges, including poor social or financial support, feeling of shame and guilt, mistrust of official and support persons, and social stigma. Given the growing identification of trafficking survivors around the world and the potential complexities associated with healthcare provision, it is time to raise practitioners' awareness of human trafficking and foster service approaches that are well suited to the care needs of trafficked persons. While there have been greater acknowledgement of the essential role that healthcare providers can play in the identification and referral of possible victims of trafficking and as a part of the support network for trafficking survivors, there is still little evidence on providers' knowledge about human trafficking or their ability to respond to suspected trafficking cases in safe and appropriate ways. Indeed, to date, the role of the health sector in the counter-trafficking response in most countries is extremely limited. Ministry of Health or health departments are often not part of formal counter-trafficking national coordination mechanisms, and where they are included in practice, they are frequently less active than other public sector services, such as shelter providers, police, immigration, and social services. With the growing identification and referral of trafficking survivors into recovery services, there's a pressing need for specialized guidance for health professionals, especially for care providers in areas with high number of migrant workers and exploitative labor sectors, who might also come in contact with vulnerable population that can include victims of trafficking. So now after your reading, we're going to see whether you understood it. Number 1. According to the passage, which one of the following statements does not describe human trafficking? Out of the 4 different statements, we can see that option A is wrong. It says that human trafficking is limited to countries that have high rates of poverty and crime. This is not a statement that was stated in the text. Basically, human trafficking can happen anywhere, even in developed countries. Number 2, the main focus of this passage is? It will be in option C, because there is a special need for healthcare workers to recognize the special needs of these trafficked persons. In this particular text, it didn't really explain exactly what is human trafficking, it didn't define it, and it didn't talk about what skill sets do these human traffickers have to traffic people. Overall, the text actually focuses on the human rights of the trafficked person, essentially the human rights of the victims. The next question. The author indicates that trafficking survivors struggle with all of the following challenges except. In the text, it was quite clear. It says that the most challenging bit is how to identify other trafficked victims. Number 4, it can most reasonably be inferred from the passage that the answer will be option D. Public services such as shelter, provide social services more frequently involved in counter trafficking and hence lacking in other aspects. Number 5, in the last concluding paragraph, what does the author suggest? The answer would be option C. Professional training is needed for healthcare providers to identify and refer victims of trafficking and provide support. Now, having read through these two different readings, are you able to synthesize the different information from it? They both talked about human rights as the core of their topic. There are some similarities, but there are also some differences that were shared. So using the 4 different aspects that we talked about in the previous week, namely genre, tone, formality, and purpose, can you identify these 4 aspects for the 2 readings you've just done? Let's go. Now, let's review the answers, shall we? In reading 1, it's more of a narrative story. The overall feeling you get from reading Desmond's story is that the attitude was quite neutral. It was quite careful and very positive, not critical at all. The aim of the information is to inform you of a historical event, so relatively, it was rather informal. Whereas for the second article, it's more of a research article. The overall tone and attitude is more critical, it is more concerned. The purpose of the article is to inform you of a fact that has happened, and the level of formality, the usage of the word as well as its critical point of view, is more academic. Now, having read through these 2 different articles yourself, who do you think the target audiences are? In reading 1, based on the usage of word and its logic, we can see that reading 1 is probably more suited for general readers, whereas for reading 2, it's probably more aiming towards professionals, especially those who work in the healthcare industry, or professors or students that works in this particular industry. Now, having read through these 2 different articles, let's reflect on that, a skill that we learned a couple weeks back. First, let's think, what is the relationship between the 2 articles we just read and us? How are they related to us? Are there human rights topics that you yourself are involved with, or are human rights issue an issue that is happening around you? Are there people around us who has been treated unfairly or unequally? When you have read this particular article, what questions have you raised? For example, is it that should trafficking survivors and their children be given the rights to healthcare? Or is it that in addition to healthcare, what else do you anticipate the victim of trafficking would need to have? And whose responsibility is it to prevent or to stop human traffickers? Is it public sector's agencies like police, immigration, or social servants? Or is it the family of the trafficked people? Now, alas, is the question you're going to ask is that what action should be taken to defend human rights? So in today's lesson, we discussed the topic of human rights. I hope it has been useful to you. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.